Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining this webinar on bringing the strengthened quality standards to life. My name is Liz Hefren-Webb. I am the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commissioner and I'm chairing today's webinar. I would first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I extend that acknowledgement and respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people watching today. I'm joining from Turrbal country. Joining me on the panel today are Robert Day, the Assistant Secretary of the Harmonisation and Regulatory Strategy Branch from the Department of Health and Aged Care. And from the Commission, Emma Jobson, Executive Director, Regulatory Strategy and Policy, Sarah Kelly, Executive Director, Provider Registrar, Christian Hess, the Executive Director of Quality, and Bronwyn Jaggers, the Executive Director of Education, Engagement and Communication. Before I start the discussion, I'll do a bit of quick housekeeping. After we hear from our speakers today, we'll move to a Q&A session, and you can ask questions at any time. Just use the question box via the live Q&A tab, which will be visible on your screen. We also have a short survey for you to complete at the end of today's webinar to provide us with feedback on today's event. Just stay online and a survey will pop up on screen. It's only short and your feedback is important to us, both in determining future topics, but also to understand the value of the topics we'll be discussing today. Today's webinar will be recorded and published on our website in the next couple of weeks. Everyone who registered for today's session will be sent a link to the recording as soon as it's available. Today, we're going to talk about bringing the strengthened quality standards to life. We will talk about how the quality standards fit within the broader regulatory framework and the important role they play in driving continuous improvement. We will then focus on how the Commission will regulate the quality standards and how you can be preparing yourself and your organisation. I'm really pleased with the strong turnout we have today, and I encourage you to share your thoughts, comments and questions through the live Q&A tab. We have had lots of questions already submitted and we will try to get to as many of these as we can. So let's get started. I'm pleased to now invite Robert Day to kick off our discussion. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks very much, Liz. Hi, everyone. Great to be part of the conversation today. And my job is to try and put the quality standards in the wider frame of the new regulatory model. So the new regulatory model is going to be part of the new Aged Care Act when it starts on the 1st of July. And the foundations of both the new Rights-Based Aged Care Act and the new regulatory model are the recommendations from the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety. The Royal Commission found that we needed to make some changes to the way that we regulated aged care and to better protect older people from harm, particularly in terms of the processes we have to bring providers into the system. The Royal Commission also highlighted that one of the best ways to protect older people from harm is by encouraging excellence and continuous improvement. Like all of you who work in aged care, both the Commission and the Department have been working to improve the way we do our work since the Royal Commission. And I like to think of the new regulatory model as the next step in that evolution, building a new framework that change for the way that aged care providers enter the system, for the way your obligations are structured, and for the regulatory tools that are available to the Commission. So from day one of the new Act, existing aged care providers will be automatically set up or deemed as registered providers in the new regulatory system for aged care. Under that new regulatory model, providers will have a single registration across all of the aged care programs that you deliver. This registration will be time limited so that there is a regular process of checking that each provider organisation is suitable to deliver aged care and set up to meet their obligations. The registration period will usually be 3 years, but the Commission will have the discretion to set either a longer or a shorter period for those registrations. As this slide shows, to achieve a proportionate approach to regulation, provider obligations and regulatory oversight will be set according to registration categories. And these registration categories group together service types that have similar types of inherent risk. For providers who are applying for registration to deliver services in categories 4, 5, or 6, there will be a requirement to have an audit against the strengthened quality standards as part of your application to be a registered provider. An audit is also going to form part of the process for renewing a registration or for adding an extra one of these 3 categories to an existing registration. For providers operating in these categories, it will also be a condition of registration that you comply with the strength and quality standards in the delivery of services. So let me talk a little bit about the quality standards and how they've been developed. As many of you are aware, the strengthened aged care quality standards have been in the public domain for some time. The most recent version was published on the department's website in February of this year, and that built on a final draft that had been published at the end of 2023. The February 2025 version contains changes that result from the legislative drafting process, translating the strengthened standards into subordinate legislation or rules under the new Aged Care Act. Consultation on these rules was open for 4 weeks and closed last week on the 13th of March. There might be some further wording changes following that public consultation process, but at this stage, we're not expecting that the overarching intent or expectations of the strengthened quality standards will change. In addition to the quality standards, there are a number of overarching obligations that will apply to all aged care providers, regardless of the type of aged care you're offering or the registration categories that you are in. Some of these core conditions include having an understanding of the statement of rights and having systems in place to make sure that the care you deliver is consistent with those rights. Both you, your workers, and your key personnel will have an obligation to comply with the Aged Care Code of Conduct, and you'll need to be undertaking worker screening checks. All aged care providers will also be expected to have incident management and complaints processes in place, and to keep personal information in a secure manner, and to use it only for the purposes of providing care to older people. And finally, there's also compliance with financial and prudential standards as a standard obligation of providers. Before I finish up today, I'd like to just sneak in a sneaky plug for the provider registration preview, which is the next step we're going to take in the process of deeming aged care providers into the new Act. In early April, every provider will be emailed a PDF summary of their deemed status based on the information that we and the Commission currently hold about you. It'll be a chance to make sure that the information is correct and give you some insights into the way your organisation will be set up under the new regulatory model from 1 July. If you would like more information about the new regulatory model, the deeming process, you can visit the department's website using the URL you can see on the screen. You're also really welcome to reach out to my team and I on that email address, agedcareregmodel@health.gov.au, and we'll do our best to answer the questions for you. Thanks for your time. I'm going to hand over next to Emma Jobson.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Rob. I'm Emma Jobson, the Executive Director with Regulatory Strategy and Policy in the Commission. So following an information that you've just heard from Rob on the new regulatory framework, I'm going to start by briefly recapping the history of the strengthened quality standards. So strengthening of the quality standards was driven by a recommendation of the Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety. And they asked us to review and make changes to the current standards, making it clearer for both older people and providers on what is expected to ensure safe and quality care. And they asked to look at strengthening expectations in 5 focus areas. So these are dementia care, governance, food nutrition, diversity and clinical care. So the Department of Health and Aged Care led the development of the strengthened standards and has undertaken significant consultation processes. The first draft of the strengthened standard was released for public consultation in October 2022, with the most recent draft released in February 2025 this year. The strengthened standards ensure that the care and services are provided delivers are safe, high quality, and meet the individual needs and preferences of older people receiving care. The new strengthened standards are simplified, comprehensive and measurable, and they go from 8 to 7 standards. They are an integral part of a rights-based approach under the new Act, with rights embedded throughout the standards. and they form an important part of the wider obligations which providers and workers are required to meet, with a focus on ensuring that older people and their individual needs and preferences remain at the centre of care planning and delivery in the new system. So while audit against the standards for registration categories 4, 5 and 6 of providers informs re-registration decisions, importantly, the standards also give providers themselves a way of viewing and understanding their own performance and proactively taking actions to continuously improve. I'm now going to provide a quick refresh of each standard. So standard 1 is now the individual rather than the person, as it was when first published. This aligns to the language of the new Act and, importantly, the language of the Statement of Rights. This standard underpins the way that providers and workers are expected to treat older people consistent with their rights and is relevant to all standards. Standard 2, the organisation, sets out the expectations of the governing body in particular to meet the requirements of the quality standards and deliver quality funded aged care services that give older people confidence in their provider and empower workers to do their job well. In the recent release of the standard, Standard 2 was updated to place a stronger emphasis on the role of workers in delivering safe and quality care and services for older people. Next slide. Standard 3, the care and services, describes the way providers must deliver funded aged care services for all types of services, ensuring care is individualised to each older person. And Standard 4, the environment, describes the responsibilities of the provider to ensure older people receive funded aged care services in a physical environment that is safe, appropriate, and supports their needs. Next slide. Standard 5, clinical care, describes the responsibilities of providers to deliver safe and quality clinical care services to older people. And Standard 6, food and nutrition, describes the responsibilities of providers to ensure older people living in a residential care home have access to nutritionally adequate food and a dining experience that meets their needs and preferences. And Standard 7, the residential community, describes the responsibility of providers to ensure older people living in a residential care home feel safe and at home in the residential community, that they have opportunities to do things that are meaningful to them and are supported to maintain connections with people who are also important to them. So I next wanted to take us briefly through the structure of the standards. A recommendation of the Royal Commission was to enhance the standards to be more comprehensive, detailed and objective, and to improve the measurability. So across all 7 standards, you will find the structure has been enhanced to clearly set out 4 key parts. An intent statement to explain what the standard is meant to achieve, an expectation statement to outline what older people can expect, an outcome statement which is enforceable under the legislation, and actions that can demonstrate how providers can meet the outcome. So this table shows you how the 146 actions either align to the current quality standards, to other existing provider responsibilities, or clarifying existing requirements under the current standards, or whether they are new or significantly enhanced concepts. So overall, 75% or 3/4 of the action align with or clarify the existing standards. This means that most providers should be ready and have a very good foundation to build on to conform with the strengthened standards. And we know through our current audit and monitoring program that there are already strong rates of compliance with the current standards. So this also means there are 21 actions which are new or significantly enhanced. Of these, 8 are in Standard 2, the organisation, with half of these relating to the emergency and disaster management requirements. 6 are in the new dedicated food and nutrition, Standard 6. 5 are in Standard 5 clinical care, with 3 of these focusing on safe and quality use of medicines and 2 on clinical governance. The last 2 are in Standard 3 care and services, and they focus on dementia care and person-centred care. So following finalisation of the recent consultation on the strengthened standards, We will update this table again to include an analysis of the additional 8 actions in outcomes 2.2 and 2.6 that have come through in the February version. If you haven't accessed this already, a detailed analysis of the 146 actions under the Strengths and Standards framework is on our website to give you more insights into what remains aligned, enhanced, or new. Later in the presentation, my colleague Bronwyn will outline the resources that we've developed to help you prepare further for the Strengths and Standards. But I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Sarah Kelly to talk about registration. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Emma, and it's lovely to be here today. I'm Sarah Kelly. I'm the Acting Registrar for the Commission, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the registration model before I hand over to my colleague Christian Hess, who manages our audit function. So as Rob, I think Emma have also outlined, all providers of funded aged care services are going to need to be registered by the Commission. So when applying to be registered, organisations and people will tell us which of the provider registration categories they want to be registered in. And this will be informed by the type of services they provide or plan to deliver. So when registering and renewing providers, we'll test their suitability, their capacity and their capability. And we'll do this at registration, and we'll also do it again at renewal. So registered providers have obligations and conditions of registration that they must comply with based on their registration categories. We'll then also give a supervision status to all registered providers, and we'll monitor them through our risk-based monitoring and supervision model. This helps us detect and understand risks to older people and respond to them. And there's more information about our approach to supervision and monitoring in our regulatory strategy. So audits, which are part of registration and renewal, are focused on understanding and being confident that providers' systems and processes are being embedded and consistently applied across all of their services in categories 4, 5 and 6. I'll move on to the next slide, thanks. So this slide is where we're really just talking about the process of registration. So when a provider applies for initial registration, they'll complete an application form, and this will be available on our website. They'll need to give us information and evidence so that we can assess and determine if they're suitable to deliver funded aged care services. We'll have guidance on our website to help with this process, and this will include an evidence framework to help applicants understand the evidence that we will be expecting to see. Organisations and people applying for registration need to show that they meet the registration requirements. This includes general requirements as well as registration requirements specific to each category that they're applying to be registered in. So we'll provide procedural fairness where we're considering refusing an application or not registering a provider in a category that they've applied for, or not intending to approve a residential care home. If we do decide to register, the organisation or the person as a registered provider will confirm and set the categories that they're registered in and the period of registration. We can also add a condition to the registration. So for example, if a provider is registered in category 6 and they're opening a new approved residential care home, we may add a condition requiring them to regularly report to us on their operational plan. So this next slide talks about the registration conditions and provider obligations. I'm not going to stay here for too long because I think Rob's given us a good summary of this, but just to be reinforced that once registered, in addition to any Commission-imposed conditions, providers must meet certain obligations, including the conditions of registration relevant to their registration categories. We'll just move on to the next slide. The provider registration policy has recently been released by the Commission, and I would really encourage you to have a look at this document to get some more information about the process of becoming a provider or seeking renewal of provider registration. So the QR code that's on the screen at the moment will take you directly to the policy on our website, and I can assure you that it's an excellent read, or an informative read. So next month, on Tuesday the 15th of April, from 2 to 3 p.m, we're going to have the next webinar in our series, and we're going to focus there on registration. So we have talked about it a little bit, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, but that webinar is where we will really focus in on registration. So we'll also look at renewal, we'll look at things like timeframes and things like how to seek variations to registration. So registrations are open 2 weeks prior for the webinar on registration. And if you want to keep up to date with that, subscribe to the Quality Bulletin, any of the Commission's socials or our website, so that you get some notice that that registration is open. And we definitely are using the questions that have either been submitted already or that are being submitted now to help inform the content of that webinar as well. So the strengthened standards are part of that broader suite of obligations and conditions that I was just talking about before. And as you can see from this slide, demonstrating conformance with the quality standards is a key part of the registration and renewal process. So conformance is assessed through audit, and Christian's going to shortly discuss that in a bit more detail. So once a provider is registered in category 4, 5 and 6, complying with the quality standards is a condition of their registration. So we'll monitor the registered provider's compliance with their conditions of registration and obligations, and this happens in a range of ways. So for example, we'll collect high quality intelligence. Some of that comes through the reporting that providers give to us. We triage that information so that we can then take data-driven regulatory responses if they're needed. We manage complaints and we address risks early where we can through complaints resolution. We conduct provider risk profiling and we take flow-on monitoring activity where needed. And we use a suite of enforcement tools where providers or workers are failing to comply with their legislative obligations, and that's resulting in serious harm to older people or their systemic misconduct. Now, you may have noticed there that I used a couple of different terms, compliance and conformance. So we're using them deliberately, and I'm just going to explain for a moment that conformance is predictive. So audits are used to determine whether determine a conformance rating in relation to whether a provider can meet the quality standards through looking at how they're demonstrating their government's arrangements, their systems and their processes, and the impact that that has on the care experience of older people. Compliance with the quality standards is an ongoing condition of registration for all providers who are delivering services through categories 4, 5 and or 6. The strengthened quality standards also have an incredibly important role, not just in telling older people what they can expect from their provider in terms of the quality of the services that they receive, but also as a tool for providers to review their own performance and invest in improvements. Audits in relation to the strengthened quality standards are a driver of continuous improvement as well. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Christian Hess, who's going to talk you through how we'll be undertaking audits from the 1st of July.
Wonderful. Thank you much, Sarah, and good afternoon all. It's great to be here presenting on such a timely and important topic. My name is Christian Hess, and I'm the Acting Executive Director of the Quality Assessment Monitoring Group, and I'll be discussing the role and purpose of audits. So under Section 109(2)A of the Aged Care Act 2024, audits are a registration category specific requirement if a provider is seeking registration and registration renewal in categories 4, 5 and 6. Complying with the strengthened standards at all times is a condition of registration for all registered providers, again in categories 4, 5 and 6, and the audits we conduct are part of the decision-making process for registration renewal and variation, where a provider is looking to add 4, 5 or 6 category services. The findings of an audit inform the decision maker about whether an applicant or a registered provider will be able to conform with the quality standards that apply to that relevant registration category. So now I'll take you through the next slide, which talks about how the Commission is assessing conformance against the strengthened quality standards underneath the new regulatory framework. The standards that apply to a provider will not be the same for everyone. Standards that apply to a provider will depend on the provider's registration category or categories. On the left-hand column here, you can see the provider types and their registration categories. And on the right-hand column, you can see which standards apply. As a basic rule, if no standards apply, there is no audit. And if you deliver a combination of services, an audit will include only those services to which the standards apply. However, it's incredibly important to note that provider obligations, as Rob and Emma spoke about, apply to all registration categories. Type B providers, who are listed there, may also be audited against outcome 5.1 which only applies to service types of care management and restorative care management. During an audit, the Commission will initially collect evidence about a provider's governance arrangements, systems, and processes. The Commission will then utilise this information to understand how this is reflected in the delivery of aged care services by the provider, in all the residential aged care services for Category 6 providers, and at a representative sample for Categories 4 and 5. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail further on. So the next slide shows you a typical audit process for a provider who delivers services in all registration categories. Stage 1 is about initiating the audit and obtaining information to understand the provider's operating context. This will occur through a request for information as well as an audit initiation meeting where we'll explain the audit process and discuss the audit logistics. This is a great opportunity for you to meet the team. Stage 2 of the audit delivery is where we collect and assess evidence. So the audit team meets with the provider's governing body to gain an understanding of the governance arrangements, systems, and processes. We continue to gather evidence by meeting with senior management. And during the next part of this stage, we look at how care and services are being delivered to older people. Is the service delivery consistent with the provider's governance arrangements, systems, and processes? Are they providing high-quality care that upholds the rights and meets the individual needs of the older person? This includes on-site collection of evidence at all of a provider's approved residential care homes, which includes engaging with older persons receiving care and workers to understand their experience. For home care providers in Categories 4 and 5, we use a sampling approach that covers all the care and services being delivered. And this may also include on-site evidence collection where providers deliver services from a specific location, such as a day respite centre. Stage 3 is audit reporting, where we give the provider a preliminary audit report that details the performance ratings for each outcome and quality standard. The provider has a chance to review and respond to the report, and then a final report is prepared. This approach should drive efficiency and transparency for providers, while allowing the Commission to assure itself that providers are meeting the quality standards as a condition of their registration, providing the best possible care. I'll now take the opportunity to touch on a few key principles of the audit methodology, and they include all providers who are undertaking an audit will have a single point of contact within the Commission for audits, and that'll be the audit manager that's assigned to your suite of audits, and that's to establish transparency and consistency of communications. Audits are based on providers' re-registration expiry date and will be coordinated between the Commission and the providers. Evidence about the provider's governance arrangements, systems, and processes covering all care and service delivery is collated at the start of an audit program, and this reduces duplication and repetitive evidence requests. Graded assessments are predictive and consistent, and I'll touch on graded assessments a little bit more in a few moments. And the Commission takes a no surprises approach throughout the audit process, and that includes sharing preliminary graded assessment outcomes before the team leaves site for residential aged care providers. So now, as promised, I'll talk a little bit about the new graded assessment. So the Commission will be introducing the graded assessment model and moving away from the current met and not met model. The new graded assessment model will consist of 4 grades. Gradings are applied to all relevant outcomes with an overall rating for each audited quality standard. Graded assessments provide more transparency on a provider's performance, and that supports the provider to make improvements. And they're informed by an audit, and our auditors will grade at both the outcome and the standard level, as mentioned. So the 4 grades that you can see there on your screen is conformance, and that's when we're satisfied with a provider's performance against the standards. Minor non-conformance, and this will be where we can see there's an opportunity for improvement, or we see a gap in the provider systems and processes, but it's not systemic and it doesn't represent high risk to older people. Major non-conformance, and this is likely to be where we do find high risk to older people, and a reminder that we expect providers to have systems in place at all times to support the safe delivery of quality care. Providers will need to be able to show how those systems are implemented and how they monitor and improve those systems. Where they cannot demonstrate that they provide safe and quality care, that's likely to lead to a finding of major non-conformance. And now we have an exceeding rating, and so that allows us to recognise when a provider is fabulous. We're still working on what the framework for this looks like right now. However, our current thinking is that this would be where a provider has achieved conformance against all the standards and can meet some additional criteria that demonstrates their excellence. Now I'll talk a little bit about the transition to our new audit methodology, which commences from 1 July 2025. And we've had lots of questions from providers who are unsure of how the new Aged Care Act impacts their residential aged care service accreditation expiry date. And as we've mentioned a few times before, effectively this service level accreditation expiry date no longer exists, and all providers will have a new allocated provider level registration expiry date. The process provider level registration and renewal of registration begins from 1 July 2025. And this is when providers who have a registration expiry date in early 2026 will start to receive their invitations to renew their registration. Some additional key points to understand about that transition is that, reflecting on the information provided by Emma earlier, if you're compliant now, you're likely to be in a really good place. You don't need to completely change what you're doing, but there will be resources to assist you to prepare for the uplift in expectations from 1 July 2025, as my colleague Bronwyn will shortly talk about. Audits are focused on understanding and being confident that provider systems and processes are being embedded and consistently applied across approved residential care homes for Category 6 providers, and/or a sample of care and services being delivered at targeted locations for Categories 4 and 5. We're looking for assurance from providers that we can have confidence in their systems and processes moving forward. Minor non-conformances are an expected audit outcome during this transitional period, similar to the rollout of the current quality standards in 2019, which saw a significant increase in non-compliance rates, which have reduced over time. We'll be considering evidence of the provider's commitment to continuous improvement when determining audit ratings. And now, in terms of the resources for provider readiness, we'll be going into resources available to assist for your preparation in the next section of the presentation. My colleague Bronwyn Jaggers will take you through a range of educational resources, First Nations resources, and a sector readiness plan that the Commission has developed. Over to you, Bronwyn.
Thanks very much, Christian. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you here today. So we have published a range of resources to support the sector with the introduction of the Strength and Quality Standards. And in the handouts tab on your screen, you'll find a document that has links to all the resources that we've already published, and some of my colleagues have touched on some of these already. And that document also has information about how you can stay up to date with new materials as they come online. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of a couple of those key resources now. Our digital guidance tool is where you can access the Strength and Quality Standards guidance for providers. This online tool helps you find information related to the type of care that you provide or that you intend to provide. The information can be filtered by selecting your registration category and your role. So there's information available for governing bodies, providers, and workers. And the tool shows you which standards will apply to you from the 1st of July 2025 and gives detailed information about how to meet each of the outcomes. And you can view the guidance online, or you can press print and it will collate the information relevant to you, and you'll be able to print a copy. Our online learning platform, Alice, contains learning content relating to a wide variety of topics, including an introductory program relating to the Strength and Quality Standards. And access to Alice is free of charge for providers, their employees, and their governing bodies. In addition to those online modules, each month we're also going to deliver live educational workshops for people working in the aged care sector. Our workshops provide learners with practical information aimed at supporting workers with meeting their obligations in their service. We're currently delivering a Strength and Quality Standards in Practice workshop to assist workers with preparing for the new standards. And this workshop will soon become available as a recorded video, with a new workshop being launched focused on the practical implementation of the standards through consideration and discussion of case studies. We also have a range of other resources available to help providers and their staff get ready for the standards, and you can see some of those listed on the slide. So we have provider readiness checklist, posters and fact sheets, videos, a training PowerPoint that providers can tailor and incorporate into your own training programs, and conversation cards which are intended to really prompt rich conversations about how you're implementing the Strength and Quality Standards in your service. I also wanted to highlight that we're creating some resources to support diverse audiences. And if we can move to the next slide, thanks team. In 2024, we began working with First Nations stakeholders and communities to develop a dedicated First Nations communications and engagement strategy and new resources to support First Nations providers, workers, older people and their communities. And as a result of this project, we've recently published a range of resources, and these include visual storyboards, conversations, guides, videos, and posters. And there's more resources coming in the next few months. To access these First Nations products, we have a First Nations hub on our website. And again, that link is provided in that resource that I talked about before. We also have a similar project for resources for multicultural audiences, and those resources will come online in the coming months. I also wanted to highlight our sector readiness plan, which we published in January this year. So this plan outlines our intended program of resources and support for the sector that we'll be publishing over the coming months. As materials come online, we update the plan with a hyperlink so that you can easily find the resources that have been published. As subordinate legislation and consultation processes are finalised, there may be some changes to the products that we're delivering, and so we'll provide updates whenever that has happened. So please do stay informed and keep checking back with the sector readiness plan regularly so you can see the latest for when things will be available. So I'm going to hand back to you, Liz, for our question and answer segment. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Bronwyn, and thanks to all our speakers today. So we now move to our Q&A part of the webinar, and I can see that there's a number of questions that have come through already, but I might just start working through some of the questions that have come through. And I think this one probably goes to Robert. It's a very short question. How do we register?
Thanks, Liz. So for those of you who are existing providers, there isn't going to be a need to register. We'll reach out to you from the department in April initially to give you what we call a preview of your new status under the Act, and then by operation of law on the 1st of July, you'll be set up as a registered provider under the new Act. If you're an organisation that doesn't currently provide aged care services and you'd like to become one, then it will be a matter of an application to the Commission, and as Sarah indicated, that will be the first step. Will be a form that will be on the Commission's website for you to make that application.
Thanks so much, Rob. So just to be really clear, if you're a current provider, we will be sending you your deemed status in April. So don't panic if you haven't heard from us yet. And we will be telling you which categories we think you should be registered in, and you will have an opportunity to comment on that. Can you confirm that?
That is all absolutely correct. And that registration, that provider preview will include a couple of other details that will be of interest to providers, Liz. It will include the initial registration date so that people have an understanding of when they're going to come up for renewal. It'll have some key details like the aged care homes and the home care delivery branches that are associated with that registration as well, and it'll be a chance for providers to make sure that we're, as an entity, they're operating currently in multiple programs, that we've brought those different programs together under the one registration. But yes, absolutely right. Don't need to worry if you're already a provider. You'll hear from us.
Thank you. I've got a question. I don't know if it's for Sarah perhaps or Emma, but it's about allied health. Do allied health professionals need to register? The question says they're receiving mixed messages. So we might try and clarify that. Or I don't know, Robert, if that's you or...
It's somewhere between Sarah and I. I think there's a little bit of confusion because registration gets used in a few different ways, doesn't it? It gets used with APRA, it gets used in terms of being a registered provider, and we're talking about having a worker registration system for aged care workers as well. I think in terms of the conversation we're having today about registration of providers and provider regulation, you only need to be a registered provider if you want to be the organisation that is getting direct subsidy from the Commonwealth Government. And so that is usually the provider who is employing or contracting the allied health workforce. So there'll be worker screening obligations for those allied health professionals, but they won't need to register as a provider in the form that we're talking about today. Sarah, would you add anything to that?
I was going to say, I think you've covered that extremely well, Rob. So no, I concur with what you said, but no, I don't think I need to add anything.
Thanks.
Thank you. I might just, while I've got Rob, I've got one more, I think is his. So when will Universa provider registration be finalised? Will a new provider be able to register as of 1st of July? And what will the new registration process look like?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And so I think in terms of what that initial registration looks like, that's that process that we talked about previously. We'll do a preview for providers in April, and then the actual new deemed registration will take effect on the 1st of July. And for providers wanting to enter the system, that new process will commence from the 1st of July, will be the first time you can make an application. I think the plan is to have the application form available before that date. I think that's probably the best answer I can give you on that one, unless your colleagues want to jump in as well.
Thanks so much, Rob. That's great. So a question probably for Emma, I think. Does the new standard 2 mean the governing body is ultimately responsible for compliance with a provider's obligations?
Yes, that's a good question. I would say the Act and the responsibilities of registered providers means that the governing body is responsible, but Standard 2 outlines what's expected of the governing body to ensure the organisation is compliant with quality standards. Is that a clear answer?
I think that's right. So the answer is yes, but there's a fair bit of guidance to support the governing body. Thank you. What is the expected timeframe for the audit process for a residential aged care provider with multiple services? Christian, I might go to you for that one.
Thanks, Liz. The answer, as with most things, is it depends. So it depends on the size of the provider. It depends on the number of residential aged care services and services that are being delivered. Effectively, we have 18 months to conduct that audit, but obviously every effort will be made to ensure that those audits occur as close as possible to the registration expiry date. As I mentioned through my process in terms of the engagement the Commission will have with the provider, we'll talk to you about the logistics, the schedule process, and how we look to map all that out, and that'll be done in conjunction with the provider. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to kind of engage in that process. And as I mentioned, it depends on a variety of variables there.
Thanks, Christian. I've got another one for you. Will the quality review process continue until 1st July 25 and apply to home care providers and CHSP services? So for providers undergoing quality review audits in the next 6 months, are they based on the current quality standards or the new standards?
Thanks, Liz. Great question. So any quality audits that we do between now and before the end of the financial year will be underneath the current standards, and any that we do on the other side will obviously be registration audits, which will fall underneath the new strengthened standards moving forward.
Thank you. There's a question probably for Bronwyn. Are there any resources to brief boards on the changes and the implications for board members from a governance perspective? I think Emma might have sort of answered that to some degree.
Yeah, thank you. I missed part of Emma's answer. So the digital guidance tool, as I talked about previously, has one of the filters you can apply through that process is for governing bodies. So that's where board members will be able to find the guidance for them about what the strengthened quality standards mean for them and their obligations. Thank you.
Thank you. This one for Sarah, I think. What is the cost recovery consultation paper for provider registration and renewal of registration?
Thanks, Liz. So people may be aware, I'm presuming the person who asked that question is probably aware, that we're currently consulting on some proposed cost recovery arrangements for Commission activities. that would start from the 1st of July. So the proposed arrangements there obviously have strong alignment to some of the activities we've been talking about today. So provider registration, provider renewal, variations to, or some elements of variation to provider registration, and then the associated audits. So that consultation is live now, runs through until the start of April. So there's a consultation paper and then a sort of slightly easier to read paper that goes alongside that. It's on the Commission's website, and I would encourage people to have a look at that, have a read, and then there's a couple of different ways that providers can provide input into that process. So either through a web-based survey or by either uploading or sending a submission through to the Commission as well. And that information will be used to guide advice to government to determine the final charging arrangements. And I apologise, I think you stayed on screen all the way through that response, but I'm hoping the audio came through okay.
Thank you, Sarah. And just to clarify, we do currently charge for accreditation and audits. So this is consulting on the new arrangements because we're no longer talking about accreditation, we're talking about registration. Is that right?
Yeah, so we currently charge for market entry, so currently known as becoming an approved provider, and we also charge for the activity connected to accreditation and re-accreditation. So because those activities, they cease with the current Act and the new Act comes into force from the 1st of July, so we're consulting on the sort of potential costs associated with the new activities. So still market entry and then still looking at activities that are kind of have a relationship to accreditation. So that sort of renewal process and then audit as well. And all of those details are outlined in the paper if people want to have a look at them.
Thank you. And while I'm with you, I'd like just to ask a further question about minor non-conformance. What process will the Commission follow for minor non-conformance? Will there be a reassessment, and will it be on-site or desktop, or must providers address gaps without further review until re-registration is due?
So there's a couple of options here. So the first one is that as part of the audit process, providers will be aware, sort of as we're coming towards the end of that process, if the Commission has concerns around conformance, and there might be either minor or major non-conformance findings. So there will be an opportunity there. There may be immediate actions that a provider can take, and that might actually mean that when the final decision is made on the audit, that conformance has been addressed, and so therefore it allows them to be found conformant in that area. If when the final decision is taken, there are still areas of conformance, and I think we're talking specifically here about minor non-conformance, then that isn't necessarily a barrier to a provider having their registration renewed, but it does need to be remedied. There needs to be a clear plan in place for how that's going to happen, and it's most likely that the Commission would do that through placing a condition on that provider. So depending on the nature of the non-conformance, the Commission would engage and work with the provider, establish what the appropriate plan was to have in place. A condition would go into effect. That would then get monitored. And again, it depends on what the conformance is, whether that's monitored through provision of information to the Commission, whether the Commission may come back out on site at a particular point in time. But when that minor conformance is addressed, then that condition will then be removed from the registration.
Thanks, Sarah. I've got a question maybe for Rob, I'm not sure. I'm a social support provider. In some resources, social support falls under category 3. In other resources, social care in the community falls under category 4 in the digital guide. Can you confirm?
I can confirm, and I can tell you why there's been that difference. There was in our process of consulting on the new regulatory model a little bit of movement of service types within categories. but the final decision was based on some feedback around the nature of care being delivered in social care. The final decision is that it will fall into category 3 for social support. So I apologise we haven't tidied up some of those historical documents. We'll make sure we label them clearly in future, but definitely category 3.
Thank you, Robert. This one's probably Emma, I think. If you offer personal care in category 4, do you need a clinical governance framework?
If you're registered in category 4, you do need to comply with the quality standards and will be audited against the quality standards, which include requirements to have a clinical governance framework.
Thanks so much, Emma. Got another question. I don't know whether it would be for you, Emma, or someone else, so I'll read it out and you can let me know.
Sure.
Can we please have some further clarifications on competency-based training? How far do providers need to go with competency assessment? Can more senior RNs train and assess competencies of junior RNs when performing certain tasks that they aren't experienced with?
I think that's very specific, so we'll have to take some of that on notice, Liz, and we're very happy, particularly the senior RN, what could be supervised for a competency assessment. I think broadly in terms of competency and training outcomes that are under the new standards, we're keen to see providers have really developed plans in place to have either completed some of or arrangements in place to be completing their training and competency assessments. And that's how we'll be looking at it in the early days under the new standards. And of course, as we all become familiar and the standards take effect from 1 July, and soon after, we'll be expecting providers to be shifting their systems and practices to align. So if that helps with the broader component of that question, but we'll be publishing FAQs after the webinar. So we'll collect that question there and make sure we come back.
Thanks so much, Emma. One for Christian, I think. Will there still be unannounced visits?
Thanks, Liz. In terms of through the audit process, there will not be unannounced visits. That'll be scheduled but the Commission always reserves the rights to undertake an unannounced visit where there may be risk identified through a variety of different means, and we will have a separate monitoring from the audit team that'll undertake those unannounced visits where we believe there is risk. There might be non-compliance, non-conformance, those kind of things.
Thanks very much, Christian. All right. I just might go back to Emma and just ask whether you can give any more detail on the strengthened food standards.
Oh, thanks, Liz. Yes, we're getting a lot of questions about the new standard on food, nutrition and dining. And as I said earlier, it was a focus of the Royal Commission. There are new actions in this standard, particularly in requirements, outcomes, 6.1, 6.3, 6.4, dedicated to partnering with older people to deliver a quality meal and refreshment services. 6.3 relates to the provision of food and drinks, 6.4 to the dining experience. So we're really looking for better recognition of the importance of food, drinks and dining experience to older people, and particularly their quality of life and wellbeing in residential aged care. We've had a regulatory campaign running on the importance of food, nutrition and dining for over a year now. There's some excellent resources on our website. There's also currently access to the government-funded meal and menu and mealtime reviews, and providers can express interest in having those reviews on our website as well. All things that would be useful to help you prepare for the new standards. But importantly, I think as Bronwyn raised earlier, our online digital guidance tool has a lot more additional information and resources linked to the new standard on food, nutrition and dining, which I really encourage people to have a look at.
Thanks so much, Emma. One for Bronwyn, I think. We are struggling to educate our staff due to ongoing changes in guidance and terminology. Are resources now final?
Thank you for the question. Not all resources are final. Where the material that is published is related to information that's in the rules of the Act, that are still being finalised. We can't say that that material is final. We have put that disclaimer on all of the materials that we have published where it is not final, so it should be clear. When we're able to finalise those resources, and that will be when the consultation process on the proposed rules is complete and the rules have received assent by the Parliament. And as we all know, there is an election period coming up shortly that will impact on that as well. We will update our materials as soon as we possibly can, and we will update that information on the front of them to make it clear this is now final. And we'll also alert people through things like our quality bulletin that we've made updates. So we appreciate that there is a level of uncertainty with some of our materials not being able to be final yet. But in the end, we made a judgment that it was more helpful to put out material in draft as far as we could, rather than hold until the final would be available, because we knew that that might be getting close to the 1st of July. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bronwyn. I might just ask one final question, I think for Sarah possibly. What is the consequence for major non-conformance?
Thanks, Liz. So I guess the trajectory is sort of similar to the minor non-conformance in that it predominantly sort of rests on what the actual conformance relates to. So to take a word from Christian, it depends. I think the response to major non-conformance is obviously going to be more escalated than minor non-conformance. So again, the Commission will likely be considering whether we need to escalate the provider in our supervision model and have closer engagement with them. And then I think it really then turns on the assurance that the provider is able to give us in relation to the response to the non-conformance. And so if we can see a provider who can again assure us, who has clear plans in place, for example, it may be potentially through a condition or an enforceable undertaking that we respond to that major non-conformance. If, however, a provider is not able to assure us, then again, it will also depend on the impact that we're seeing to consumers. The impact on older people is obviously it's sitting at the heart of what we're doing and what we're concerned with. That then may mean that we're escalating into potentially a compliance or an enforcement response. So I think the main thing for providers to take away from that is their engagement in that process is critical. So the way in which they can understand and get their head around the non-conformance, engage with the Commission, have plans in place and give us that assurance is going to impact the kind of response that the Commission takes.
All right, thank you, Sarah. That brings us to the end of today's session. Thanks for joining us today. And a reminder, today's webinar will be recorded and published on our website the next couple of days, and we'll send a link to everyone who's registered for today's session. I also encourage you to visit our website to look at the range of resources that Bronwyn talked about. Finally, a reminder that the feedback survey will be on your screen immediately after this, and that a recording of this session will be published online shortly. Until next time, thanks for joining us today.